Alright, to take this top cover off, you simply put this down into the start position, flip this lever down, this pops right off. And then you can take your pre-cleaner off, or air filter, whatever you want to call it. Alright, what next? Okay, I'm going to pull the spark plug wire off for safety. And now I'm going to remove these two nuts that are on the studs that hold the carburetor in place and see if I can't get this air housing assembly to come off. This little mini 1/4" drive ratchet handle makes it real easy to get these nuts out so that you can just pull this assembly off. About to run out of video, but to get the linkage out, it basically you wiggle this butterfly and pull up and off to the side, and this pops right. Alright, battery died last night, so I quit and back to it this morning. And to remove the linkage here for the choke, you just flip the choke to the full on position, flip this out, and this whole little metal piece comes out so you don't lose it. Now the only thing really holding the carb on now is the fuel line, which is kind of hard to see, but actually hooks on right there where my thumb's pointing. Alright, I just realized that this plastic rod that goes across here actually just unclips from this clip. So now with that unclipped, I can actually slide it out of the other end here and pop this completely out of the way. I could even probably get that to pop out of this little wire, the kill switch wire, to pop out of there, but I'm not going to worry about that. I can move it out of the way. Enough. Now it gives me the ability to slide this carb out all the way, and it's going to make it easier for me to get that fuel line off if I tilt this carb up like this. And now that just slides off that brass fitting. Okay, before I disassemble the carb, I'm going to give it a quick blast on the outside to get this outside dirt off of the body. And that way when I take it apart, I don't have to worry about that dirt getting inside. Okay, now that's nice and clean. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this bottom screw right here. This is the fuel pump side of the carburetor. The way you can tell that is, for one thing, this is where the fuel line goes in on this side. The other dead giveaway is, you see that tiny hole right there? That's actually the port that is a matching port on the crankcase, and pressure from the crankcase actually pulses through there. That's what actually actuates the diaphragm that's inside here and pumps the fuel. So I'm going to remove this screw and carefully remove the diaphragm. Okay, I've removed the diaphragm, and that looks fairly clean in there, but I can see right down in there that's already looking like it's got some nasties in it. Okay, I got some of the fuel out of there, so you can actually now see the crud that's in there. Oops. Trying to hold the camera and dig this stuff out at the same time. You can see it's actually just big chunks of nasty crap in there. And that's right on the fuel inlet side. So you can imagine that's a big part of the problem. That wasn't exactly the inlet. The actual inlet where the fuel comes through the pipe here and comes out this port right here, and then I'm not positive on exactly which way it travels through this fuel circuit, but make a long story short, we certainly don't want that to be completely clogged like that. I'm not going to remove this diaphragm from the top half, because what's behind that diaphragm is actually the area where the fuel doesn't go. It's the area where the pressure is applied to give the pumping action. So I'm going to not remove that, because I'm going to risk, if I do that, I'm going to run the risk of tearing that diaphragm, which I don't want to do. And I've just inspected the diaphragm, and it doesn't appear to have any tears in it, so I don't have to worry about that. So now I'm going to take these 4 screws off. This is the metering side of the carburetor. This is the side that does the job of a float in a float type carburetor, but because A float type carb wouldn't work good in a chainsaw where you're constantly changing the angle of the carburetor. They basically have this type of carburetor. So there's a little metering circuit underneath here, and I'll show you that in a second. So here we have another diaphragm. This side of the diaphragm is the non-fuel side of the diaphragm. If I were to open this up and I were to see any fuel on this side, I would be wary that there's probably a tear or a break or a crack in this diaphragm, which would indicate it would need replacement. This one looks pretty good. This side of the diaphragm is actually through this port right here, which feeds back into the air box, is actually open to the atmosphere. Okay, that diaphragm's stuck on there pretty good. I don't want to tear it. So I'm just basically popping it open enough so I could check under the hood, and it looks very clean in there. So the screen did its job and protected this whole metering side of the carburetor, and I'm just gonna give it a quick blast with some carb cleaner. I've now reinstalled this cover, and the port faces the choke side of the carburetor, or the air box side of the carburetor. I'm now going to reinstall the fuel pump cover. I always like to make note of the way the cover comes off, so when I go to put it back on, I can make sure I put it back on correctly. In this case, it's kind of nice because there's actually a rounded off corner right here that matches the shape of the carburetor, so it makes it kind of easy. Alright, so now I'm going to reinstall the carb. Okay, first I popped the fuel line back on, and this particular fuel line, the thick part of it there, it's got a flat surface, and that flat surface faces down and actually sits right on top of there. I'm going to put this cross lever in. Of course that engages on this side, and then when you're putting it in, you're going to make sure that this metal clip right here actually gets underneath this little cam area, and you snap it in. You also want to make sure the throttle linkage is on the top, but it's not underneath here. And once you get that in, you can just give it a quick snap to see that it's in correctly. Now I'm going to put the choke on next because I'm just basically doing a reverse order of disassembly. And with the carb slid to the rear slightly and the choke in the full on position, it's easy to slide this pin linkage back in. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the accelerator linkage on this side. That one's a little trickier, but can be done. And then of course you give it a couple of quick pulls to make sure it's not binding, and that looks good. And of course down here we got our choke. Once that's all tightened back in, it'll work correctly. So now I'm going to reinstall the air box. I'm going to give it a quick cleaning and then reinstall it. Getting the two carb mounting nuts on could be a bit of a trick. That one's kind of easy because I can get my fingers in there and kind of help to keep it from falling off when I get it started. But this one's a little tougher, so I just use my extension here and kind of use it as a little makeshift nut driver. It just fits in there, and I'm able to stick the nut in there and then hold it very steadily and get it in there. So that worked out fine. I'm going to tighten these. Alright, now I'm going to clean the air filter before I reinstall it. Reattach the spark plug and install the cover. Got a break for lunch, then we got a Little League game this afternoon, and when I get back we'll test fire this thing. Okay, I'm going to test out the saw. Probably going to be hard to start at first because the carburetor now has no fuel in it, so it's going to take a few pulls to get the fuel drawn up into the carburetor.